Welcome back and greetings, MACC members. It's Laurel Hanson. I'm MACC's Program and Member Engagement Manager, and this is another episode of the Ask MACC Workforce Podcast, brought to you by the Metropolitan Alliance of Connected Communities. We know the human services workforce faces ongoing challenges and inequities, and this is why at MACC we launched the Workforce Solutions Initiative that includes these recorded conversations about real stories in today's workplace. You'll find these podcasts plus numerous other resources for MACC members in our Workforce Solutions Hub on the MACC website. So on today's podcast, I couldn't be more excited for this episode. We're going to talk about how we support leaders. And with me today is Julie Bluhm, the interim CEO at MACC member Ham Clinic. We're definitely talking with the right person, as Julie has spent her career helping organizations and leaders prepare for leadership. So welcome to the MACC podcast, Julie, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great. Great to have you. I'm so glad that we have this chance to talk again, especially about such an important topic as leadership development and support. I know that we started this conversation when I recently met with you at your organization, who is a MACC member, Ham Clinic. And I was really looking forward to being able to continue it. And we said, we got to keep talking about this. So here we are talking about this. So glad that you can share it with the MACC network. Before we dive into the topic, though, I think our listeners would really like to get to know you a little bit better. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and why this topic's so important to you?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a social worker by background. I started my career as a therapist and really just felt strongly that I needed to understand how to do the work on the ground before knowing that my passion is in leadership and in systems change, but I also wanted to just really understand clients and client-facing work. And so I spent the first decade of my career as a therapist and a direct line social worker and moved into leadership and quickly fell in love with cultures, developing cultures that are supportive, taking the experience I had as a direct clinician and applying that to leadership and figuring out, how do we better support the staff who do this work? Because my foray into direct service taught me a couple of things. One, I'm very passionate about the work and I really enjoy working with clients, but it also taught me that it's hard. It's hard on your nervous system. It's hard on your life. It's challenging. And I learned that I really became exhausted and depleted. Later, I learned I'm an introvert and I have ADHD. So that made a lot more sense to me about why seeing 8 clients a day for therapy while I enjoyed the work was just really depleting and not the best use of my energy. And so when I moved into leadership, I learned that I could apply that same level of energy, but in a very different way that actually energized me and helped me to really support teams. And so I'm really interested in leadership development, but specifically leadership transitions, because eight years ago, I took my first executive director role at Guild, and it was always my dream to be an executive director of an organization. Going back to nonprofit service and mental health was really where my heart was, and I was really excited to join. And it was an incredible experience. But it was a really rocky start. So when I had joined the organization, I was recruited, like many of us are, and the picture of the organization that I was given in that process couldn't be more different than what I walked into on day one. So it was, this organization that was ready to grow, rapid growth and innovation, external facing role. And what I found when I came in is that half the leadership team were on their way out unexpectedly. And I had to rebuild the infrastructure from the ground up. And it ended up being an incredible and rewarding experience. But I quickly reached out for some support. I'd say, I think midway through my first year, and built a network. I think we all know Kate Barr from Propel, who recently retired from Propel. She was a huge support to me and helped me develop a network of people who were also, I was following a founder. So also following a founder, a longtime leader.
Yeah.
And what I learned in that peer network is that we're doing this to people all the time. Like they're coming into organizations.
Yeah.
And it's not because, and it wasn't that the board was deceiving me or that there was any, or the recruiter didn't. I just think that we just didn't know. We just didn't know, what was going on in the organization and the current state. And so what I learned in meeting with other leaders is that they were having similar experiences and that were really burning out a lot of people at the front end unnecessarily because they're coming in, maybe because, when I was in the interview process for the role, I wasn't asked about building infrastructures or financial accounting, processes. I was asked about innovative programming, mergers, right? And so really about how do we make sure that we're hiring the right person for where the organization is at that time, both so the organization can have a smooth transition, but more importantly for that leader to be able to succeed in the role. So that's why I'm passionate.
Yeah, life lessons learned, and I think some really wonderful nuggets of advice in there in terms of how organizations get ready, right? How they really process what's going on in their organization as they approach a transition and get adequate input and involve others in that conversation so that there's a very realistic picture and everyone's on the same page. And so you having been through it, and I've certainly heard from leaders, and you even brought up the adage that it's lonely at the top. And even for folks who aren't new leaders, they experience that every day. I was just on Zoom with our MACC member leaders, and there was a comment in chat about, it is lonely. Leadership can be lonely, and all the likes were flying, right? Everybody was at consensus. So I think there is a sense of, I don't know, maybe you just drive to connect and share and to have those supportive relationships when you are in a leadership role. And I think you need to foster those. So thank you so much for sharing your personal experience. I think nothing is as helpful as hearing someone's story. So thanks for being transparent with us. So we've noticed that within the MACC network, so now we've grown to 63 human service nonprofit organizations, that there have been so many leadership changes in the past few years, maybe a post-pandemic trend. It certainly started before that, but it escalated. And it's really an understatement for our network. We were looking at our organization chart and noticed, at least half of our organizations since the pandemic have gone through some leadership shifts. So changes in executive directors or just, other modifications. So let's talk about this. When a new leader comes into an organization, what do you think are the critical steps for that organization to take to really support that new leader's success? That's really what we're talking about, right? Laying the groundwork for success.
Exactly. So I mentioned it, right? It starts at recruitment. So it's really about understanding the current state of your organization before you're bringing in a new leader, before you create that profile, before you go out for that search. And so really understanding what's going on. And our board models, rightly, we talk about governance, we talk about not getting involved in operations. And so it is kind of a juxtaposition to lose your leader and all of a sudden have to know, right, what's going on to find the next leader. So it's really starting there. But once you get that leader, hopefully you're really excited. Normally people are really excited about that new leader. And I think one of the traps that we fall into is we become, we fall in love with this new leader. During the interview process, you may ask them about their vision, and they may have a really compelling plan or a vision for what they would want, to do should they be hired with the organization. So I think right off the bat, one of the mistakes that boards make is just being like, all right, our work is done. We're super excited to sit back and see what this person does at the organization because we love them, right? And what then can get bypassed in just kind of sort of washing our hands and going back to our day jobs and thinking, the organization is in good hands, is that really that person is starting a new job. And you mentioned, there's just a lot of transition happening. I've talked to executive recruiters who have said that there's a 50% smaller pool of candidates than there were before. And so what that means is we're hiring more emerging leaders, people who've been maybe like a chief program officer or VP of services into the executive director or CEO role. And that means they've not done this before. And so we need to show up and support them from day one. And that starts with really clear expectations. And so even if during that interview process, they presented a beautiful 90-day plan, we need to really make sure that that's aligned with what the board is hoping and expecting. And even if the board thinks at that moment of start that they're just ready to go on a ride with this director, 3 months in, I can guarantee you in committee meetings, board members are going to ask about things and they're going to have expectations that are going to come out. And that's where it starts to feel contentious if we haven't started with clear. So really clear goals and expectations for the first 90 days. And then for the first year after that, that everyone agrees to. The second thing is just support. And so you mentioned that, and I talked about that. It's lonely at the top. It's lonely. It is. I mean, that is. And so whether that's a coach, often executive search firms are offering 3 months of coaching at the beginning, which is great. That transition coaching, a commitment from the board, like explicit commitment to put in the budget that they're going to pay for that ongoing, I think is really important. And understanding that assigned coach may not be the coach for that new leader. And so allowing that new leader to go to their network and finding a coach or continuing the coaching that they got. Looking for peer groups. I mean, going to our associations, MACC is a great example, to find peers, and then explicitly letting them know that finding a peer network, networking, going out to coffee, that's part of your job. It's part of your job, right? Like that, getting that support, but also because it builds partnerships. I think, especially a newer leader who's not done this before, they want to succeed. They're excited. Their heads down. There's so much work coming at them. And the idea of going out to coffee on the clock feels maybe not like work, but being very explicit that is a really critical part. And then consultants. There are issues. DEIB comes to mind, where we're expecting new leaders to come in and solve some of those really difficult issues that we've not gotten traction maybe in the previous administration. We have to invest. If whatever our priorities are that we're setting up for this new leader, we have to invest in them, knowing that they have a full job just running operations and thinking strategically and getting us all aligned and working with the board. And so, having a budget for consultants, if that's the expectation, not just expecting they're going to come in. And this is happening a lot with leaders of color who are coming in, where they're like, oh, great, you must know something about DEIB. You can solve that for us too. Yeah. And so, so I think saying that, okay, but they're in the capacity of the executive director, CEO. And so if there are additional skill sets that are needed, let's bring in that support and have the budget to do so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what a realistic approach. And, I'm hearing, in addition to some of the things you mentioned, I'm hearing like scaling appropriate expectations, right, for a new leader, certainly keeping that in mind. And also, it's just going to take more time and resources from the entire organization and the board than I think maybe people anticipate. Like, it's the finish line isn't when you do the hiring, right? And I think sometimes people are like, woof, we found our leader, on to the next thing. And that's really not a scenario for success. Oh my gosh. So I've heard a lot of the steps from you. Like, so you've worked with organizations, and certainly this is a field of interest. You've done a lot of research in this field. So what do you think organizations generally get right? And what do you think they generally get wrong, or sometimes get wrong when it comes to leader development?
I think what they're getting right is, we're doing more active recruiting into the role, and it's expensive. It's a huge investment to use a search firm, but I think it's really important to do that active recruiting and to take the time. And so one of the nice things, whether you engage a search firm or not, one of the nice things I'm seeing now is there is this kind of increased attention to what we're calling a discovery phase. So not just like quickly posting the role, doing interviews and hiring. There is more attention to really kind of looking and assessing and figuring out like what kind, where's the staff, what kind of leader do we need? I think we're also really attracting a really exciting pool of leaders.
All right.
I don't know about you, but as I talk to some of these new leaders coming into our field, maybe they've not worked in nonprofits before, it's exciting. There's commitment and energy and excitement and passion. There's like a lot of focus on partnership. Yeah. There's a lot of focus on, like I think historically there was this like ego involved, I've made it. I'm an executive director, CEO. I'm seeing the newer leaders taking it on more like, this is the next step so that I can meet my goal of impacting the community. Like just being a lot more, like mission centered. And so I think that we're bringing in good leaders. Yeah. I think what we're doing wrong.
I just have to interject. I love how you're emphasizing the positivity there, because I do feel like knowing MACC members and knowing our sector that there is incredible energy and there is progress happening and people are still living into their commitment in many ways. And I think we're problem solvers, so we're always focused on what's not working. And I'm really appreciative of your elevating the exciting things that are happening as well.
Yeah. So I think what we get wrong then, which makes it even more sad based on what I just said, is we're burning through those leaders really quickly. And so
there you go. There's the headline, right?
Yeah. And if we're bringing in new people into our sector, we've been wringing our hands about how do we bring in more leaders of color into our sector? How do we bring in more leaders with vast diversity of skill sets into our sector? And we are doing it. Like some of these rooms with the newer leaders that I'm coming across are the most racially, ethnically, but also skill set, professional experience rooms I've ever been in as, a leader in this sector. But then the rooms start, week over week, people start dropping off, and it's because they're losing their roles or they're leaving for their mental health, and they're being really open about that. And so then to me, that's part of my mission and my why for what I'm doing now is they've come to us, they're interested. We talk about pay, they're taking the pay we're offering. Like this is like, that's not right. Like they're coming in, they have eyes wide open into what it means to be leading a nonprofit. And for whatever reason, we're not, treating them well, and they're leaving. And I hope they're going to stay in the sector, but I'm worried. I've talked to enough leaders who just say like, I tried this nonprofit thing and I think it's not for me. And that's what makes me worried.
I think the only place to start is by having these conversations, right? Like what are the changes and opportunities here to create an environment where people can thrive? And it's not going to be any one person or one organization that figures out what the magic is, because it's not magic. It's a team effort, right? And it's transparency and being willing to enter into these conversations, recognize the challenges, and then work collectively to try to help these barriers be reduced, or I don't want to say removed, because there'll always be problems. But that's really helpful insight, Julie. I appreciate your sharing that. One of the things that really intrigued me when we first met and started talking about this was that you talked about a group that you've been involved in that supports new leaders. And I was like, wow, this exists. So we're saying, we need to do this. Hey, guess what? People are doing this. People are providing supportive environments where people who might be new to leadership can find some some companionship, perhaps some understanding, some sources of mentorship or coaching. So obviously we want our listeners to hear about that. Will you share a little bit more about this group and who it might appeal to?
Yeah, so I mentioned it at the beginning. This was that community I formed with Kate Barr when I started. So it's a group for new executive directors, CEOs of nonprofits where they were following a longtime leader. So the founder, someone maybe over 15 years of tenure, or we call it an iconic leader.
Oh,
So we all
it.
know those leaders in our sector where they, are very, maybe have, really strong public presence. And when they leave, it's like a shock to our system. And now we have a new leader coming in. And so this is just a mutual support. And so we meet every other month and just a couple of hours. And it's whoever wants to come. There's no cost, there's no commitment. It's just, show up when you can. And the thing that's been just incredible about it, besides, most of what I'm talking about, I've learned from that group, right? Besides just the energy and meeting, it's just a great place to see where we're going as a sector. Like, what is the next generation of leaders? But we just open it up, like introduce yourself and talk about what's on your mind. And within 5 minutes, like the connections, you said that about like the likes and, it's like one person said, my head is nodding so much, I think I'm going to hurt my neck. Like it is that, it's that just immediate. And it just is one of those things where you just magically feel like we've found each other and we've been able to like coalesce around some really common experience. Through this group, we've learned that there is actually a pretty consistent trend of what, like experience. And so yes, this group is open to anyone who, again, has followed a longtime leader or founder of an organization or someone who, they've told, oh my God, you have hard shoes to fill.
Well, what a gift. Yeah. It's a gift to the community. And I suppose if someone wants to learn more, they can reach out to you. We'll make sure they know how to find you. So that's a good transition into my next question. So interim CEO is in your title at Ham Clinic, but so that must mean that there's an end time in the future where you'll no longer be there. And so just kind of curious, Julie, what's next for you? And then I have a follow-up question, but maybe I'll hold that till after you tell us what's next for you.
Yeah, thanks. So I have just launched a business called Bluhm Forward. So it's my last name is Bluhm, all about how we move forward, but really focused on transition. So a lot of what I've been talking about here, you're absolutely correct. We are in a period of time where the amount of transitions is just overwhelming. And we need to get this right. I've worked with organizations who've gone through 2-3 leaders in the last 5 to 6 years. And just while we know that tenures are shorter overall, like that's just the reality of our organization or of our world right now. It's that generational shift. It's just different how people think of their tenures. Even founders are leaving, after 5 years, which I think is really healthy. But it really challenges us to maximize, like, how do we maximize shorter tenures? So, we're no longer hiring a replacement for a founder and expecting that they're going to be there for 30 years. We need to really be thinking about 5 to 7, if not 3 to 5. And so we can't, that luxury of, well, it'll take 2 years for them to really know what they're doing. And
the math doesn't math, right?
It doesn't math. And organizations can't, and if we're expecting to have that much turnover in that role, we need to really shift the way we think about succession. So that's really what I'm focusing on, is helping organizations have really smooth transitions, where the transition isn't just like a time where we just kind of sit and wait for the next leader and give a lot of tasks and roles to the people who, are second in command and burn them out. And But for me, it's coming into organizations and taking on the day-to-day work, but also leading the organization through a development, like an organizational development process that gets them really ready and excited, while providing visualization, full visualization to the board about what's going on in the organization so they can hire the next person. So my goal, really, it just aligns with everything we're talking about. I want to help organizations hire the right leader for the time and place they're in at that moment, and then execute a transition based on sort of all the principles I've talked about today, so that we can have that leader succeed.
Yeah, it's fascinating because we started out talking about new leaders, but what we're really talking about is new realities, right? I am blown away by your sort of observed data of the shortness of tenures. And I guess I knew that, but when you start realistically thinking about it and digging a little bit deeper into what that means for an organization, it's really requires a shift, right?
Yeah,
it's not the same way where you come into these relationships and make some assumptions that these folks are going to be around, quote unquote, forever. You need to assume that you're going to have shorter cycles. And then the trickle down to succession planning, all of it really changes the whole scenario. And it involves the board, it involves the human resources aspects of the whole organization. So yeah, I've been more of a holistic approach to planning rather than just a one-off, like hire someone. There's more ripple effects through the whole organization. That's really interesting. So then I have to ask, how are you advising your current role where you are as interim? How are you in advising HAM on how they can best support their new leader?
Well, so the really unique thing about HAM is that I happen to be on the board. So this timed out really interestingly for me. I had launched this business, and then, my first client was someone that I was really familiar with. So I will be the board chair. So I will get this experience of really supporting the new leader. But it's much of what I talked about here. We're really focused right now on solidifying that 90-day plan. As the interim, I'm working really, really hard to make sure that, so Maisha Giles is HAM Clinic's new leader. She'll be starting mid-November. Yeah, we're so excited. And my goal is that she can go slow to go fast, right? So that she can come in. And this is really my advice to new leaders, I would say in general, is you don't have to just take off running day one, right? To take the time to be new, to learn, to understand. And so my role as interim is really making sure that I give her all the information that she needs, all the lessons learned, these grant deadlines that popped up or these licensing audits that popped up that we didn't, particularly plan for, weren't very organized, having all of that pulled together, all those lessons learned, and really just help her integrate into the organization in a really organized but calm way, so she's not shocked and surprised in her first day and off to the races and exhausted. So really just being really present and intentional and doing everything we can. From a board, we really did some self-reflection and realized we were doing that thing where you hire a leader and you say, great, and show up to the first board meeting, after they start and kind of like spectators, right? What are we going to see? And we really dropped the ball. And so now it's just about the things I said, what are the 90-day plans, making sure that she gets to meet with every single board member, and really just get to know us, and that we really start from a relationship building standpoint, but also understanding that, I think this is part of that maximizing shorter tenures. I think the board has a unique role to play in that, because some term limits, right? We're on boards for 9 years. That could be two different, you know what I mean? If you've got 3-year terms or whatever, right? People are serving a long time on boards. And so I think that they really can play a role in that continuity. And historically, I think boards have been kind of comfortable showing up to meetings and approving things, and they trust the executive director. I think we just need to be more fluid and think of our role as Obviously all of the governance requirements we know about being fiduciaries and stewarding the organization's strategy, but also being thought partners, having their back, like just getting to know them and build a relationship and support them, and make it a little bit less lonely. Like, yes, the board will always be another constituent for the executive director, right? But I think that we can show up in different ways to just support. Yeah. So that's what we're doing, is really thinking through how we do that well.
Yeah. I like what you said too at the beginning, where you were talking about a calm entry, the go slow to go fast. I think the team appreciates that too, right? So I know myself as a team member, I'm going to probably respond and engage better with a leader who does take their time and doesn't come in, going 100 miles an hour. So anyway, it probably serves everybody well. You've shared some awesome advice, and here we are at the end of our conversation. I could talk to you all morning, but I do want to just leave the door open here for any final words of advice. I always like to wrap up these podcast conversations with a little parting wisdom. So anything, you've shared a lot, anything else?
Yeah.
Maybe perhaps just top of your list advice.
Yeah. I really think, and I've alluded to it, but, we, especially if you're a new executive director or CEO, you've not done this before, but I think it goes, to anyone coming in new to an organization, is like, yes, at the end of the day, this is on your shoulders. Like, that is a reality, right? Like this, you are the leader of the organization. And if there are things, that other people should be doing, if there are, items the board should be taking on that they're not taking on, don't take it on. You actually aren't alone in this. And so I think there's so much pressure, especially this idea of hiring more emerging leaders, is that 70% of people have imposter syndrome. That's something that I recently read. And when we have imposter syndrome,
I thought we all have it.
We probably all have it. But I think that sometimes that creepy imposter syndrome makes us sort of like, I'm going to take it all on and I'm going to just do it myself and I'm going to prove myself.
Well, I am the nonprofit world, right?
Yes. I run 100 miles per hour. Yes. And we just take it on. And that's actually setting yourself up, not just for burnout, but for actually, for problems with the board in the future, for problems with staff in the future. And so my best advice. Yes. And so anyway, the first 90 days, I always recommend that book. I leave it behind for every leader that follows me. I buy it for all my executive team. Follow it. Like it's pace yourself and be new.
Good advice. And I love a resource, and we'll make sure we share that with MACC members as well. I think this conversation has been, it's been amazing, but I also think, we've talked a lot about new leaders. I think a lot of this applies to all leaders, right? These problems don't disappear once the word new is no longer in front of your name and title. So very applicable, I think, to so many in the MACC network. Thank you so much, Julie, for your time and the conversation with MACC today on our podcast. Such a great discussion with Julie Bluhm, currently HAM's interim CEO. Thanks also to the sponsors of our Workforce podcast, the Ameriprise and the Schultz Foundations. Appreciate their support. MACC members, make sure you sign up for MACC's monthly Workforce Digest email with links to what's new in our Workforce Hub. So every time we drop a podcast, you'll get that monthly email and link to, so you can listen. We built the Workforce Hub for you, and we hope you find it helpful. You'll find so much information there, including all of the past podcast conversations. So check those out. And folks, keep in touch. We're here to support you and our network. Thank you. Have a great day and be well. Goodbye.